Shalom, shalom, mashpaka. Welcome to lesson 25, and guess what? Welcome also to the renaming of the series. So moving forward, it will be called Learn Yahudyth with the Nazarene of Yahuwah. And someone may be wondering, why the name change? Well, this lesson is focused on explaining that and also bringing clarity, as there are some persons who oftentimes, based on their understanding of different branches of the language, tend to debate, not realizing they're possibly not debating in the same branch. And someone may say, what do we mean? Well, let's begin so we can get right into it. Lesson 25. Yada Yahuwah. So, Mashpaka, in the Tanak, and Tanak stands for the Torah, ha-Nabaym, and the Ketubim, or the instructions, the prophets, and the writings, or the commands, the prophets, and the writings. What we today call Hebrew is referred to in various ways. However, in the Tanak, it is never referred to as Ivrit, which is the modern word or term used. Neither is it referred to as Abryth. The word Abryth, or what most know now as Ivrit, literally means of or pertaining to an Abri. That is the language of a Hebrew. But that adjective form, Ivrit, as well as Abryth, do not appear anywhere in the Tanakh. Instead, when scriptures refer to the language, they use various expressions, and we're going to discuss what can actually be found. Now, let me say this. The people are referred to as Abri. So one person, Abri, more than one, Abrim. In the modern context, you will see one person, Ivri. Now, while Ivrit does not appear, the noun Abri, or in the modern context, Ivri, does appear, and it is a noun that refers to a person and not a language. So we will observe there are a few examples listed here. We have Bereshith, or Genesis 14, verse 13, where Abram is referred to as an Abri, or what some know as a Hebrew. In Bereshith 39:14, we see a Hebrew was brought into us. That word there is Abri, and they were referring to Yosef or Joseph. In Shemot, or Exodus 1, verses 15, 16, and 19, we see reference made of Abarim midwives, or Hebrew midwives. Also in Yuna, or Jonah 1, verse 9, we see a phrase, I am a Hebrew and I fear Yahuwah, the Elohim of Shamayim. That word Hebrew is actually Abri. And it means one who has crossed over, coming from the root aber, which means to cross or pass over. It identifies a people descended from Aber. However, Abryth, or Ivrit as some know it, never refers to the language. In fact, the language is not named in those contexts. So we want to get into how this word Ivrit came about, for the language to be called that. What was the language actually called then? If not, now we do this lesson not only to bring clarity and to create shalom on this particular topic, or we attempt to bring about some sort of shalom through understanding the journey of the language, the branches of the language. How has the language evolved through the centuries? We want it to be understood. Oftentimes, there are those in the mishpachah who get into disagreements about how words ought to be called, or which word represents what. And sometimes they are both correct, but they are in different branches or periods of time. And so unless they make it clear which of the periods of time they are referring to or referencing, we will continue to have some level of disparity or confusion concerning the language. Why do we choose to do this now at lesson 25? Well, when we started this lesson, or this series rather, we did not focus so much on the name of the language. We did surface level research and recognized two words or two names, and we went ahead and used the one that was closest to the ancient pronunciation. But then we recognized we wanted to be able, and I'm in a parking lot, so in the event you hear cars around me, that is where I am. But we wanted to be able to clearly reference where the name of the language is located, whether in scripture or in the books which were removed, etc. But let us continue as we get into this lesson. All right, so we're continuing in lesson 25 in our series renamed. But let's continue. Who first called the language by the English word Hebrew? Well, the language we call today Hebrew was not originally called that in the scriptures themselves. The language was called by other names, such as Lashun Kanaʿan, which translates to speech or lip of Canaan. And we reference Yeshayahu 19 verse 18. The language was also called Yahudyth, and we see this reference to Yahudyth, the language of Yahuda, or what some know as Judah. References, 2nd Malachim or 2nd Kings 18 verse 26. There's also Nehemiah or Nehemiah 13 verse 24, And you may also look at Yeshayahu or Isaiah 36 verses 11 and 13. In the removed books, books such as Yubalim or Jubilees, Chanuk or Enoch, Sirach, Tobit-Yahu or Tobit, Baruch, these books also do not call the language Ivrit or Abryth. In Yubalim 12 verses 25 to 27, it says that Abram learned the language or speech or tongue of creation, which may be rendered as Shaphath ha-Baryah. So that's the language or speech of creation, Shaphath ha-Baryah. But we do not see it being called Ivrit or Abryth. The emphasis is on the language of the Shamaim, restored to Abram after Babel's confusion, after the scattering of languages. In Chanuk and Baruch, they also make reference to qadash writings or qadash tongues. You will see those sort of references in those books, or what would be called qadash katha. For writings, or qadash lashun, or qadash tongues. Of course, qadash meaning what is separated, what is called out, what is dedicated. You may hear some persons saying what is set apart. But none of these books use Ivrit or Abryth either. So while the people were called Abrim, and the singular form Abri, the language was understood as the dedicated tongue, or Lashun HaKadash, or the language of Yahuda, Yahudyth, even in those books. So how did the scrolls refer to their language? Well, the Qumran community, and we reference circa 2nd BCE to 1st CE, never used these words Ivrit or Abryth to describe their writings or speech. Instead, they consistently referred to Lashun HaKadash, or they spoke of Kathab Hatura, which is speaking of the writings of the law, or the writings of the Torah, or Dabarim Hanabi, which refers to the words of the prophets, never calling them Ivrit or Abryth. Salika, that should be Kathab Hatura. I believe the previous presentation slide I said Katha. It should be Kathab. It is from that word you have Katuba, a written agreement, or Kataba, writings in the skin such as a tattoo. Katab, writings, to write. We also find, so here's an example. In the community rule, what is referred to as the community rule, one of the documents found in Qumran, and also the Damascus document, another document which was found in addition to, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. The emphasis is on studying the Torah and the prophets as it is written, but the text gives no label to the language, itself, as some specific term referring to a national lingua or national language. The reference was for divine speech, not the national or linguistic label. Right? In later writings, such as prologues to Ben Sira, it is called Hebraic glossa. That means the Hebrew language in Greek. Josephus, in his writings, Antiquities and War, also uses Hebraisti for the tongue of his people. So who first called the language by the English word Hebrew? Maybe a question that, persons have. Well, the shift came when Jews writing in Greek, or the lingua franca, after Alexander the Great, started referring to the ancestral language as Hebraic. And from there, Latin took it, or the Roman writings, and they recorded it as Hebraeus. And then English translated it to Hebrew. So the modern word Hebrew as a language name or language label first appears in Hellenistic Jewish literature. So literature that was influenced by the Greeks, and also the Roman period literature or sources, and not from the Torah itself. So now we're going to take a look at the branches of this language from ancient times to modern times. So first we have what is referred to as the classical biblical branch, and the period would have been from 1200 BCE to about 200 BCE, spanning the pre-exilic and post-exilic times. Forms that were within the classical biblical branch would have been what were referred to as archaic biblical Hebrew, and this type of, or this form of the language was found in the Song of Deborah, found in Judges or Shaphatim 5, the Song of Masha, found in Shemut or Exodus 15, the Barakah of Yaakov, found in Barashith or Genesis 49. It was said to be more poetic, older vocabulary, and represented in archaic forms. Then we have the standard biblical form, and the main narrative and prose style. So, for example, the Torah was written in this form. Yahusha ben Nun or Joshua was written in this form. Shaphatim or Judges was written in this form. Shamuel, Malachim or Kings were found in that form. We also have what was referred to as the late biblical form. So post-exilic writings such as Azarah or Ezra, Nehemiah or Nehemiah, parts of Kahalath or Ecclesiastes, Chronicles. These show Aramaic influence, different vocabulary and grammar. So when they found the scrolls, they would have observed these different forms of the classical biblical branch. So the period spanning 200 BCE to 70 CE with the Dead Sea Scrolls was a mix of the late biblical form and features of what was referred to as Mishnaic Hebrew, sometimes called a transitional stage. So we see where the language is evolving. Distinctive spellings, which were more Aramaic, and there were some Greek or Hellenistic loan words. Again, let us emphasize this. We did say it in a previous lesson, but we're saying it again, or I'm saying it rather, that the Dead Sea Scrolls is not the oldest document found that contained the ancient language of creation. The Dead Sea Scrolls, however, is the closest to the most complete version of the scriptures that was found. Then we get to the period of 200 CE to 500 CE. And during this period, you saw the rise of Mishnaic, the Mishnaic branch, or what is referred to as the rabbinic branch. The language of the Mishnah or Tosefta and early Midrashim, we find that the grammar was different. There were no shortened verb forms, simpler syntax, new vocabulary. It was still a spoken language in this period, but there was said to be, competition with Aramaic. So, of course, the language started to change from what it was originally. We then get to the medieval branch, the period 600 CE to the 1800s. The language became largely a written or literary language and not one that was spoken so much each yom or each day in that time. It divides into different regional styles, and this we want you to pay attention to. So not only do you have branches in which the language evolved, periods of time in which the language was altered or was changed in some way or influenced by other languages. But here we see the medieval branch dividing into these regional styles. Sephardi Hebrew, which was predominantly found in Spain and northern parts of Africa and the Middle East, as they call it. There was the Ashkenazi Hebrew, which of course would have been found in Germany and Eastern Europe, and these territories also influenced how the language was formed or shaped. So these particular regions also impacted changes that took place with the language. And we also have the Yemenite, what is referred to as the Yemenite Hebrew. And this is said to be a unique preservation of older features of the language. We find that in this period there was heavy borrowing from languages such as Arabic, Latin, and local European. It was used in philosophy, in poetry, in grammar, and also in religious works. So someone may be arguing the language currently, not realizing that maybe what they're using is the medieval branch, which subdivides into Sephardi, Ashkenazi, and Yemenite. But let's continue. Which brings us now to the period of the 19th century, what was referred to as the 19th century revival, to today, and that is the modern Hebrew branch. And it was said that it was revived as a living spoken language by someone called Eliezer ben Yehuda, among others. And the modern version is influenced by European languages, especially Yiddish, Russian, and German. So there are strands of those languages that would have been mixed into or included into or would have influenced the modern branch of the language. It is said these individuals, to include Eliezer ben Yehuda, among, other, they would have been called linguists or lexigraphers or so. It is said that they would have somehow simplified the grammar in comparison to the biblical or the rabbinic or Mishnaic branches. They created new vocabulary for modern times. For example, words for electricity and train and computer, etc. So they would have pretty much used different strands of different modern languages to change how a number of forms of the language would have been spoken, and the aim was to now make it a revived national language, which you hear being used in what is referred to as modern day Jerusalem or Jerusalem. So here we have a summary of the branches which I would have referred to. If we line them up historically, this is what it looks like. So we have what is referred to as the archaic biblical version or branch, 1200 BCE, the standard biblical branch, 1000 to 700 BCE, the late biblical branch, 500 BCE onwards, the Qumran branch, which of course was predominantly in the Dead Sea Scrolls, having variations. Also the Mishnaic or Rabbinic branch, 200 to 500 CE. The medieval branch, 600 to the 1800s. We have the division of the branch into Sephardi, Ashkenazi, and Yemenite traditions. And of course, we now have the modern or modernized version. Now, on this channel, whenever we do the lessons, our focus or intent is to be as close as possible to the first four highlighted. And so if there are persons who have differing views on the language, please understand that it is possible what you may be presenting may be Mishnaic, maybe Ashkenazi, maybe Yemenite, maybe Sephardi, maybe Yiddish, maybe some other branch or form of the evolving journey of the language. And so it's important to understand what took place over the periods of time. But let's continue. So for what would have been said so far with the linguistic timeline, so we have the period of the patriarchal, or what was referred to as the Mosaic. The language would not have been given a specific term, or at least the literature we have, which have been found and disseminated, do not show a specific term during that period for the language itself. So the language, though it was related to the people who would have been called Abryth, and according to the modern branch, Ivrit, it was not given a term yet. Then when it gets to the monarchical periods, we see where the language is referred to as the language of Yahudyth, or Yahudyth in that branch of the language, Yahudyth. And we see references were given, 2 Kings or 2 Malachim 18, and also Yeshayahu 36. Then during the post-exilic period, in those times you have Azra and Nehemiah, who, for example, we see where it was still being referred to as Yahudyth, or the language of Yehuda or Judah. And during that time, in the post-exilic, the language started to be influenced by Aramaic. So the Aramaic influence was growing. During the Qumran period, 2nd BCE to 1st CE, we see where it is being referred to as Lashun qadash, or the qadash tongue. We would have also seen it referred to as the speech or language of creation. We would have seen it referred to as the Katab HaTorah, the writings of the Torah, or the Lashun ha-Nabaym, the tongue of the prophets, or the Dabarim ha-Nabaym, the words of the prophets. So we see different terms that are being used, or different labels being used after a period of time, from the monarchical period coming down to where we are now with the Qumran period. But we still don't see Ivrit or Abryth being used directly for the language, as an adjective for the language, though the people may have been called, or were called, Abryth or Abryth. Then you get to the rabbinic or Talmudic period, 2nd to 5th CE, and you're seeing it being called Lashon HaKodesh and Aramite. So during that period, there was the attempt to contrast what was sacred versus what was common. So language which would have been sacred versus language which would have been common. Hence, one of the reasons you find people who subscribe to these periods label and changes to the language, refused to call the qadash name of Yahuwah, which he commands his people to call upon, and which he references by saying we're called by his name. And so this is the period where you would find them saying the name was too sacred to be called. And of course, it was a period also where you find the Talmud guiding most of what was done, the traditions and all of that, rather than the majority being from the direct scriptures. They were now being taken from the Talmud. And then, of course, the modern influence of Eliezer ben Yehuda, among others, who would have now formed the modern branch and called it Ivrit, and it now became secularized language, influenced by other languages. So now we compare ancient versus modern branches. We see where the ancient would have been referred to as Lashun Kanaʿan, Yahudyth, Lashun ha-Baryah, or the language or the tongue of creation. We would have seen katab, ha-Qadash, the qadash writings. But the original script was what was referred to as the Paleo script. And it was not the square Aramaic script that we see today. So if you look through our lessons on the letters, you will see how the letters evolved in how they were written in their forms. Words carried deep pictographic meaning in the ancient times. For example, the Aleph and the Bayith for father, Ab, and it came from the ox or Aleph, and the house or home or family, the Bayith, when put together, meant the strength of the home or the strength of the house. And the strength of the house is the father. So Ab. Now, with the scriptural ancient language, over time, especially during and after the Babylonian exile, the script shifted. So exile would have impacted greatly the shift in the script, the changes that began to take place, the evolving of the language to look more like the Aramaic block letters, or what we call the Assyrian script. And this is what scribes were said to have used in some of the Torah scrolls. Then we get to Masoretic, the Masoretic period, or the Masoretic influence. Between the 6th to 10th centuries CE, the Masoretes would have then added what were called nikud, or vowel points, and also cantillation marks. And this was not part of the original language framework or frame, but a later attempt of the Masoretes to standardize the pronunciation, which in essence, in some instances, ended up changing the deeper meaning and changing, how some of the words would have been reflected or represented. So what many call perfected Hebrew today is actually a post-biblical preservation system, not the original living tongue or living language. The modern branch is referred to as Ivrit. And so in the late 1800s, Ben Yehuda was said to have revived it into a spoken national language in preparation for Zionist settlement in the land. And so to do this, he borrowed elements of the scriptural Yahudyth grammar, rabbinic or Mishnaic Hebrew terms, and many European loan words from places such as Germany, Russia, the British, French, etc. would have borrowed many of these words and created thousands of new words that never existed in the scriptures, and also would have attempted to standardize some of the scriptural words to make it, in essence, more user-friendly for people from all walks of life, so that when this perceived Zionist settlement would be in the land, everyone would now speak whatever that standardized language he now would have formed from all these variations and also other languages. That would now be the official language of that particular settlement. So what was the result? The modern language spoken today over there in modern Yisrael or Israel is not identical to Lashun Kanaʿan, not identical to Yahudyth, not identical to Kanaʿan, not identical to Katab HaTorah. It is a hybrid version. It is said by researchers that about 60 to 70% of this language, this new branch of the language, is biblical grammar and vocabulary, but the remaining portions, which were mixed in, were adopted with modern inventions and European influence. So it is not the standard by which the language of creation stands. It is a human attempt at recreating and standardizing something that only Yahuwah perfects. So with all this talk of Eliezer ben Yehuda, who was he? Well, he was born by the name Eliezer Yitzhak Perlman on January 7, 1858. And he lived to December 16, 1922. He was said to be a Russian Jewish linguist, a lexicographer, and journalist who immigrated to modern-day Jerusalem in 1881 when the Ottoman Empire was said to have ruled that particular territory. So that's this person here. Let's look at pronunciation variations. Modern Jews do not all pronounce Hebrew the same. And we looked at different forms of the medieval branch. And we would have looked at Ashkenazi, and these are the Jews of Europe. So, for example, they would say Shabbos instead of Shabbat. Then we have the Sephardi or Mizrahi Jews. Those are said to be in what is now coined as the Middle East. And it's said that they would be closer to biblical sounds. That's what it said. You have the modern Israeli form, which is said to be based mostly on the Sephardic sounds, but there are some variations, and the attempt would have been made to simplify the language. So what you find is that there then became no real distinction between some letters. So for example, the tat and the thou, they would represent both of them with just T. Irrespective of which one was used, you would just see T. The chat and the kaf would also be represented as the same, kat and kaf. They wouldn't make the distinctions in daily speech. So in the ancient language, the chat and the kaf had different guttural sounds. But in the modern branch of the language, or modern Hebrew, many Israelis pronounce them the same, kat and kaf. So it is not a perfection of the language, but it was changed or altered to suit modern use, or streamlined for modern secular use. Now, from a Hebraic point of view, the original language was given by Yahuwah. Each letter carried meaning, sound, and covenant depth. What exists today is a mixture of preservation and human alteration. Now, whilst modern Ivrit, as they call it, is, functional and unifies a particular group of people, it is not the same as Lashun qadash. It is not the same as Yahudyth of Scripture. And it is important for us to emphasize that. So modern Jews or Jewish people are believed to have revived the language into a living national language for those group of people who are there, but they have not perfected it. Instead, it is a revival, so people, or secularization, so people can now speak it daily. It is a modification with European influence, and a simplification where some original sounds and covenantal depth are lost. For this reason, among other reasons, the Nazrim of Yahuwah intend and attempt to try to help all of us to, as best as is possible, and as we are assisted by the Ruach of Yahuwah, to get back to the roots of the language, and not to simply accept or rest with the human altered language. We do believe that there is coming a time, and Scripture says it, when Yahuwah himself will cause all his people to speak the pure language again, when we will all walk again in the regathering. Until then, as best as possible and as much as is within us, we continue to attempt to get back to the roots of the language of creation, to get back to Yahudyth, to get back to Katab Hatura, to get back to the original tongue. And by Yahuwah's help, it shall be so. Toda for listening and viewing. Yada Yahuwah.
Shalom Mashpaka. Tuda, thank you for viewing and participating. Remember to share the video with others, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell.
Don't forget to grab your copy of the book Strides of Triumph, A Guide to Empowered Living. Also the book Mindful Mastery, Navigating Realities with Awareness. Both are on Amazon. Please see all links in the description below. We are very grateful for those who supported this ministry's work. Tuda Rabba. Remember to leave a review for these books. It goes a far way.
We are the Nazarene of Yahuwah.
And of course, we say Akkad Ahava, which means
One love.
And we thank all our viewers and subscribers, all the family of the Most High, for viewing today's presentation. So remember to smash that like button.
Subscribe to the channel.
And hit that notification bell so that you may be alerted every time we upload.